Okay, thanks for the opportunity to talk, and hello to everyone. I hope everyone's doing well. Yeah, so this presentation, I suppose, is just a bit of an overview of the kind of sports science support that I was involved with during the 2016 European Championships, and at the end, I'll kind of give a brief little kind of overlook at how we evolved the training process. So quickly, I'd like to probably thank Ricky McCann, who works with me at Northern Ireland. He's probably been one of the biggest driving forces behind the kind of sports science side of things with Northern Ireland. He's been there quite a few years now, and he was brilliant for me when I started there. And a lot of this is kind of in collaboration with him. So yeah, so very quickly, I'll just touch on kind of the players and the range of teams that they come from. I'll give you just a brief overview of I suppose the strategies that we use during qualification and during the actual championships themselves. Then I'll get into kind of a little bit of how we actually planned kind of building into the Euro championships themselves, the actual championships, and as I mentioned there, how we actually use some of the data to kind of inform and change our practices during the qualifying campaigns. As Patrick mentioned, my own background, I studied at University of Limerick. Where you mentioned I was lucky enough to go and work as an intern in New Zealand for 9 months, which was brilliant. From there, I started at a much different looking STATSports to what it is now. I think there was probably only 3 or 4 sports scientists working there, which I think the numbers have significantly jumped up. And I was involved probably in the Viper 1 unit, if people can remember back that far. And from there then up to now, I've been working at Sunderland and at Northern Ireland. I think I've worked under 9 managers at Sunderland, and up until probably last week, I've had just 1 manager at Northern Ireland. So the contrast is very, very different there. The players themselves, so where they kind of came between the 2 campaigns and right up until now is a massive difference. When I kind of first started during the World Cup 2014 campaign, I think my role was really, just integrate the GPS into the squad. And one of the main kind of things of that was just to get the feedback to the clubs a little bit better, and build that gap to the communication to the clubs, because it was so important for Northern Ireland to get their best players to come and for clubs to feel safe with them, when they're away with us. So one of the biggest things for me was, so when I first started, there was no real integration with the kind of coaching process, and that kind of grew and evolved, and that's credit to the kind of management team and staff as well, how that the GPS side of things and the monitoring of sports science grew. So where at the end of that campaign, they'd finished second bottom of the World Cup group, and had reached their kind of lowest rankings in their history. Fast forward 18 months and they finished top of their group, which was a record amount of points for Northern Ireland. They'd reached their highest ever ranking in the world and went on kind of long unbeaten runs, which had never been done by a Northern Ireland team before. So the transition in 18 months was massive, An actual, just a little overview of, the difference between a qualifying campaign and a tournament. So in a qualifying campaign, your squad consists of 28 players. In the European Championships, 23 players, and 3 of those must-be goalkeepers, which is stipulated by UEFA. So before we kind of the prep into the Euro 2016 camp, the manager kind of put, what kind of player do you need to be in the Northern Ireland squad? And he broke it down into kind of 4 different players. So the first one was maintenance and high output. So what I suppose they meant by maintenance was, how do players conduct themselves on and off the pitch? Are they taking up loads of the medical team's time with small little things? Are they preparing themselves right? And when they go on the pitch, are they training well? Are their outputs high? Are they tuned in and focused to the training session? That was the kind of main kind of players that the team wanted. There's a second kind of player, and I think everyone who works in a squad will probably relate or identify players like this. There's players who kind of, you bend the rules slightly for. They, maybe big characters, I suppose, but they're all right once they're producing on the pitch. That's always the main thing. A lot of things can be swept under the carpet once those players are producing, but you also can't carry too many of those in your squad. The last 2, a low maintenance and low output, I suppose these are the kind of players that you maybe relate, go with the flow, or are happy with average and not really wanting to buck the trend or push things forward or drive things on. And then the last one, which you certainly don't want, is a player who has high maintenance, but doesn't really give you any output and is not really any benefit to the squad. They're maybe more of a drain on the squad than they are anything else. The actual breakdown of the squad, you know, if you quickly look at that, you can see that they come from various different levels, you know, so, you know, all the way up from the English Premier League, where we had one player playing at the Champions League at that time, down to League One. We had a number of players in the Scottish Premier League, and we also had one player who played 1 year in Australia. At the actual tournament, we brought 2 Irish League training players along. They were just to help really with, you know, if we needed to spell kind of players in and out, or to make up numbers on days where there might have been a split squad. But one of the things with that from a medical and performance point of view was we felt we wanted to, you know, drive as close as possible to a Premier League kind of level of care and support to the players as we possibly could. Not the biggest backroom team. There's 3 physios, a doctor and 2 sports scientists. So I'm not sure how that compares to other ones, but you know, we felt that we were going to try as best as possible to drive things forward, and anything the players are doing off the pitch would hopefully help to push them on. I'll gloss over some bits here. It's just generally just some of the monitoring strategies we use. I think people will have seen all these before, but I'll just briefly go over some of the reasoning behind we use some of these. I think that the role of a sports scientist and physical performance coach, whatever you want, is to, whatever you want to call it, sorry, it's just to drive and improve the physical performance of players. You know, there's a lot of kind of constraints and different things fall into this. As you can see, there's loads of different brackets that fall into that. But what me and Ricky kind of decided to do was, how do we kind of streamline that down to what are we going to do to try and improve this, and maybe just try quantify what the players are doing. So we decided kind of these are going to be our kind of 5 performance objectives. First one, monitor player readiness to train. Secondly, you know, monitor the player's training load. Thirdly to that, you know, provide feedback, advice and guidance to the management team. And I think that they're probably the key words for me, was advice and guidance. You know, you don't have the players for a long time during qualifying campaigns. So it was important we weren't trying to tell the coaches what to do. They needed a lot of time with the players as well. So advice and guidance and having a conversation with the management team was very important to kind of bridge the gap between sports science and the coaching and help those come together. Again, a lot of the time clubs would send kind of players programs over. And it'd be me and Ricky's job to kind of help and try facilitate that with the players and arrange times for them to go and do that work. And also, we typically had tended to have kind of small squads. The depth of players in the Northern Ireland squad teams is not massive. So we typically, sometimes it was almost like a club environment where players would come and do some return to play stuff with us. Sometimes it was to get a break from the club. Other times it was, you know, they might be touch and go to actually play the game, and they were coming to maybe take the risks to play for their country. And then finally, just monitor any recovery kind of stuff and deliver recovery interventions where we felt it possible or where we felt players maybe needed them. Overall, what was the ultimate objective? Keep the players fully fit, available for games throughout preparation and the championship. For me, quite simply, that came back to, can we keep our best players and as many players as we can on the pitch? And that's ultimately going to help to lead into us as close as we can to some level of success. Very quickly, just kind of, I suppose, a timetable of a timetable of the monitoring process. So GPS, RPE and heart rate was worn every day. A wellness questionnaire was taken every morning. I know some people have their views on wellness questionnaires. I think it works very well on international level because, you know, you have the players in a hotel 24/7. You can kind of put interventions in place. Club level, personally, it hasn't really worked for me at club level, so I don't use it. But at international level, I feel it has a good benefit. A movement screen, it was just very simply, over the years, we always found kind of there was 3 main areas players would kind of complain or not complain, sorry, but would maybe flag up to us that, you know, it was their calves were a bit tight, their groin or their hamstrings were a little bit tight. So we decided we'd just do kind of at the beginning of the week when they're relatively fresh, and then towards the end of the week when we felt we could make a difference if they were still feeling that. So that was just a knee to wall for a calf, a sit and reach for hamstrings, and a groin squeeze used in that process. CK analysis we did the day before a game, and then after games as well, which I'll touch on a little bit later. And then anyone who's used to going away on pre-season or international camps will know how many meals there is. So body weight was always one we checked every morning for players and staff as well on some occasions. During that time, the actual unit we used was the Viper 2 at the time. And again, very quickly, just some of the key metrics we kind of used. So I'll gloss over that because people are probably quite familiar with all these metrics. An example of a drill report that would go to the coaching staff. So just underneath the two red arrows in the left-hand side, kind of just reported an average of the squad as close as we could, relating that back to the game metrics. And then over on the right-hand side, I think Adam's work has probably made this a little bit more popular now of modelling the kind of metrics and key metrics you want to use to bring it all together to almost like a game equivalent. So we had some good success with that, and the coaching staff understood it and liked how it was presented and stuff. Just dropping that into kind of more of a drill report, I'll just kind of bring your attention. Again, we used kind of the modelling approach with some key metrics. On this day, it was kind of a tactical day, and it was 3 variations of a 10v10. So the possession 10v10 with 6 goals. So it was a directional possession, just an open possession, and then finally a 10v10. So what the coaching staff liked to see was what were they getting out of each drill and how much were they covering, and also how related was that to the intensity of the actual game. So you can see, the actual directional possession was much higher than the just open possession, and then no surprise that the actual 11v11 was as close to match intensity as we wanted. There was some stopping and starting within that, but it was just a good visualization, and again the coaches understood how and when and what they wanted to see. Again, just a daily summary. I think anyone, if there's anyone starting out in sports science, I think one thing coaches don't like to hear is when they're asked about the session, and you just say, oh yeah, it was good. I think they want a little bit more context on that. So again, that's something me and Ricky tried to provide. So this was just a very simple summary of, how the players were going into the session, how we felt they were coming out of the session, and then just a little breakdown of the time they spent in each drill, and also the actual versus kind of the training time. So the coaches, again, understood and just a nice, clear understanding of what had happened that day. Just getting into, I suppose, a little bit more the nitty gritty of the actual plan for the European championships. So as I said, we kind of have players come from various different levels. So what also that means is their leagues finish on different times. So one of the things we wanted as best as possible to try give the players a 7 to 10 day gap after their season had finished. So the first phase was kind of just a recovery phase really for the English Football League players. Obviously any players who got into the playoffs, that wasn't feasible for them. And then it was just broken down into 4 different kind of phases of the camp. So we had a Football League camp, a full league camp in Dublin, phase 3, phase 4 in Austria, and then the actual championships themselves. So I'll go through those in a little bit more detail and some of the rationale behind why we picked certain things or why we did certain things. Again, before, like I just kind of mentioned, I maybe need to work on my drills my graphs compared to his. But again, the playing minutes was a really simple and kind of clear one to show for us, how much did players do. And again, the range of what players did was fascinating for us. We had some players who played the equivalent of maybe 6 games over the year to some players like Ollie Norwood, who played nearly 65 to 70 games that season. So we kind of quite a few players who probably played underneath the average for various reasons. Some might have been injured, fell out of favour with their club or whatnot. We also had quite a few that we were very happy with the actual amount of exposure and game time that they played. I'll just bring up 2 examples of 2 players. So Hodgson, he played quite a bit early in the season, and then again fell out of favour. But towards the end of the season, he actually played a lot. So we were quite happy with, he had played maybe the last 6 games, I think, of his season. So we felt he was in quite a good condition coming in. Maybe hadn't felt the full rigours of a season, but was certainly match ready when he came in. An opposite kind of example is just Washington over on the right-hand side, who played a lot early on in the season at his club. And for whatever reason, he didn't play the last kind of, or played a bit part in the last kind of 6 games of his season. So we felt he maybe need some top-up work or some additional work. But there were certainly some players in there that we felt that maybe couldn't afford a full week off. So we brought them in, or we did some extra individual work with them as close to their homes as we possibly could. The phase of Manchester, so we camp. One thing that Northern Ireland doesn't have is like a training base in Northern Ireland for the national team. So over the years, we've typically used a lot of Premier League grounds for our training bases and stuff as and where we could. And so this was an excellent facility to use. But some of the objectives around that week, so it was made up of mainly Championship and English Football League players. The emphasis was kind of on small and medium-sized games. They're kind of dictated by the numbers that you have. But one of the things we wanted to do, like we knew the players only had 7 days off, so it was just to build the frequency and the volume of training back into them. Really was a simple kind of objective. And then any players that we had kind of highlighted would have done some extra work with myself or Ricky at the time. So that was the camp summary. So they just did a four-day block and a little look at the wellness. So we just wanted to kind of build a resistance to kind of fatigue, I suppose, and give them a little bit of a test on the final day. And that kind of showed with, the muscle soreness and physical fatigue starting to kind of fall off in the wellness stuff. From there, the players had kind of a two days off over the weekend, and then the full squad would meet up in Dublin. We actually had a golf clinic with Rory McIlroy, which was brilliant. He had just won the Irish Open. So the manager liked to do that, bring other sports stars from Northern Ireland in and kind of show how much, the players would ask questions and stuff. So it was always really interesting when people of that kind of caliber came in and spoke to the players. This was 28 players had been called in for this week, and it needed to be cut by 23 at the end of the week. So it was quite an intense week for the players. The emphasis slightly changed to there was preparations for a game at the end of the week, but again we still felt there was a week where there was the players could get a bit of work and start to build up the volume and intensities of the training sessions again. And again, during that week there was top-up work for any players we felt were needed, and we also had rehab for one player. So as you can see, this is the build-up into a typical kind of, or this was the build-up to the Belarus game. So it's not your probably typical graph that you'd see leading into a game. It's especially on the last day, we ramped up the training session to be like one of the harder days. The reason for that was we felt the kind of Premier League and Scottish Premier League players had joined the group. They had only had 7 days off as well, but also on the match day, not all players are really going to be going to play 90 minutes. Some are playing 45, some are playing 65 to 75. So we felt it was worth probably getting that block of work in and then going into the game, even in a slightly fatigued state. It was worth that for what we thought was going to benefit the players. The fourth phase is when the actual squad itself went to Austria. So the emphasis became a little bit more on the tactical kind of prep for the first two games in the championships against Poland and Ukraine. There was a game at the end of the week against Slovakia. Also, so this week, I suppose it was a bit more like a typical club week leading into a game where there was a taper in the training volume and the intensity was kept throughout the camp as best we could. And again, there was a little bit more of a microscope and emphasis put on the players' recovery state and their wellness leading into the match day. So you can see there that the graph, it probably mimics what most people will probably see at club level. We had a 5-day build-in, kind of the match day -5 was sort of a split session and really just a restart day for the players. Kind of a 2-day loading day, and then as you can see, very simply, just it drops back into your normal tactical kind of low volume prep into a match day. And then the actual championships themselves, just for anyone who's not aware, I suppose, when you go to a European championship, a lot of the bigger nations who tend to know they're going to qualify, they go and pick their training base before they qualify, because they know they're going to get there. So UEFA kind of give you options to pick, and this was our training ground, which was an amateur team in just outside Lyon. So you're not actually on a training ground in a sense. So you have to kind of try build a makeshift training ground within that. So we got a small gym kind of brought over from Northern Ireland. We moved the bikes outside just to create a little more room. But it had everything we needed for what we wanted the players. There was room for them to move, room for them to lift. It actually became quite a social hub down at the training pitch as well. So that's just a little example of kind of some of the facilities we had. So just going into the actual championships themselves. So we had 4 games in 14 days. We knew we were going to have 3 in 10 days with the actual group games. But when we got out into the last 16, so that meant we had a game every 3.5 days. So probably, again, it almost mimics like what you do at a club level. If you're people certainly playing in the football leagues will understand the Saturday, Tuesday kind of nature. You just start getting into, you roll into those, and they come around very, very fast. So, but the main objectives for us were really to taper the volume, but keep a thread of intensity leading into the first game. Again, a microscope on the wellness and recovery state. And then one of the biggest things during the actual championship for us was to prioritise availability. So this was a lot of conversations with the medical staff and coaching staff around training, what we felt some players, may need. Some players might need to come out of certain things. So that certainly took precedence. And one of the things we made sure that the goal stayed the goal. So prioritising availability was always the goal. And any of the conversations we had around that was always to make sure that the players were available for the game. And also something that was new for us was we never had physical profiles of games before. UEFA were providing us during the championship. So I'll go into a little bit of detail about that as well. That's just a quick example of the time away. So I think we had maybe 12 to 15 training sessions and the 4 games. So I won't go and talk about that. It's just a graphical illustration of the time away. So the comparison of the physical outputs was an interesting one for us because we'd never seen the information, the physical outputs of a Northern Ireland team before. Leading into the championships, I knew from probably some of the pro zone stuff I'd seen at Premier League level what was the averages and what different teams were doing. But I think it was very important for us to add some level of context to this as well. So after the first game, the distances looked quite low, and we had discussions around what way do we feed this back to the players. But I certainly think the biggest thing for us how this came out was the actual formation played a massive part on the actual outputs that the team produced. You can see against Poland and Wales that the team played a 3-5-2, and they actually resulted in the 2 lowest distance and also lowest high intensities as well. Against Germany and Ukraine, against Ukraine, the distances were much higher, and Germany again, where the team probably didn't see much possession either in that game because of how good Germany were. But the jump between game 1 and game 2 between the 2 formations, we had nearly a 50% rise in high speed running from a 3-5-2 to a 4-5-1. I do believe there's other kind of factors involved in this as well, but simply looking at the data gives you a good indication of the difference. And we had a massive increase in the sprint distance as well. Just looking at the first game, I think these were some of the comments that the coaches and coaching staff made, and their kind of gut feelings around the performance. They felt the team stayed low. They didn't really have that kind of up and atom athleticism that Northern Ireland teams are really known for. The total distance was 102. I think a lot of people lost confidence. I think certainly myself, I was relatively inexperienced sports scientist. I'd never been to a European Championships, and I think you kind of look back on after the first game and you kind of think, oh, well, have we prepared the players right? And I think a little bit of doubt maybe creeps in, and and you lose confidence on what you had done. But I think after the second game, the manager made a lot of changes. And I also think that there's a lot of emotion, and players probably knew this was their, they had to win or had to get a result to not leave the competition early. So, some of the things that they were probably up and at them a bit more, they pressed a lot higher up the pitch. Some of the things that the Northern Ireland team are known for, the total distance was up 10K. I was never one to kind of pin the performance on the physical outputs, but one of the biggest things for me with that was that knowing the team has the capability and capacity to go to those levels and go to those distances is important for me. And I think they proved that during this game and the Germany game that, they do have the legs and the desire and belief to go and do that, and the confidence in their own fitness to do it as well, which was important for me as a fitness coach. And that's just the team played a little bit higher up, or, up and after them a bit more. And as I said, some 5 changes were into the team. Recovery interventions, again, I'll gloss over. People have seen it and know all these. Some of the things we use were cold water immersions. The ice vests were very popular for, a team of 25 Irish lads in 25-degree heat in France. So they were very, very popular post-training. We use active and passive recovery strategies. But kind of the big three again, you know, were sleep, nutrition and hydration. And luckily for us, we were able to monitor the sleep just through a questionnaire and, you know, conversations with players if they weren't sleeping. And again, the nutrition, the hotel and the hotel staff and chef and everyone with us was brilliant. So the food had a massive, massive impact on the mood state and also the recovery intervention as well. As I mentioned earlier, we used a creatine kinase profile. Ricky probably is more of an expert on this than me, but I'll best explain it as I can. So this was really just a kind of a muscle damage levels. We used it 24 hours before the game. And over the years, we'd managed to kind of get quite a good baseline level of this. So, you know, if we ever felt the players were a little bit high, we'd maybe recommend an ice bath or get a massage or whatever it might be the night before a game. And then after a game, we'd measure it as well. So one of the things, just two examples there, if you have a player with a really, really low baseline of 74, it jumped up to above 300. You know, and that's a massive percentage increase. And again, the example underneath, a player with a higher baseline level, you know, and a very smaller percentage change. So I think it was very important for us to bring that back to an individual response. Then we had other players who didn't really have massive responses, and, you know, that maybe made us think, is it more related to actual contact base, how much contact the players took during the game, or, you know, the profile itself was still on the rise. Quick gloss at the temperatures. I won't spend any time on that. Were the objectives met? What we always said was, what was the plan? How do we execute it? And, you know, how do we review it? So that was the kind of three things we always had in our mind. As for us, were the objectives met? I think, yes, they were. We were able to get all the players fit and ready for what we thought were fit and ready for the championships. And we're really happy with that. Some of the obstacles that I suppose came my way during this were, you know, we're away for 45 days. You know, nutrition, anyone who knows when they're away on this, the quality of the food can have a massive, massive impact on, you know, the mood state of people. It sounds like a small thing, but it can have a massive impact when you are away for that long. You know, certain players have certain habits and how they eat, and trying to kind of fit and keep 28 players and 15 staff happy is not always. And it was Ricky kind of really drove that, and he did a really, really good job on that. But that certainly is a challenge to how do you not make that boring when you're away and coming up with different meals? We didn't have a nutritionist, we didn't have a chef travel with us. So, you know, it was kind of myself and mainly Ricky who drove that side of things. UEFA have a lot of rules and restrictions, which I wasn't actually aware of. And probably one of the mistakes I made was, you know, thinking we were able to get some food delivered to the stadium after a game, you know, not really realizing, probably a bit naive to how big the occasion actually was. But UEFA didn't actually really provide too much, provided a menu, but the food they actually provided was really, really poor. So, you know, that was probably a mistake on my behalf, and something that, looking back, I'd certainly be more aware of. The facilities that you're given, our facilities are really, really good, but, you know, you're at leisure to the facilities and the space that you have. So, you know, you're not in a training ground, but what we had was excellent. And then it's just finding the balance between, you know, coaching and sports science, you know, during your build up and in through the thing. And I think that comes back to maybe some of the softer skills as a person. How do you relate and provide contact to the coaches, and do you understand understanding what the coach's aims are and understanding what the physical aims are, you know, and bringing them together and making sure they're integrated is so important, you know, to have an effective program. The key lessons learned from me, maybe about 5 more minutes. So I know I'm kind of running up to the time limit now, but planning and communication is just extremely important for me. You know, having your plan, you know, executing it, and as I said, reviewing what you were doing. Making sure you have aims and objectives for the days ahead. So, you know, as I mentioned earlier, keeping the goal. You know, knowing what the manager wants, you know, today, but also knowing what he wants later in the week gives you a good opportunity to kind of plan ahead, and also make sure that, you know, it suits for the players to do that work as well. One of the small things, you know, we as a medical staff, you know, don't let things fester. I think, you know, when you're away and certainly we're away for a long period. You know, you're amongst the players who are feeling the pressure of games, and, you know, they're away from their families, people are away from their kids and stuff. So people can get a bit, you know, frustrated, but it's important that, you know, don't let small things fester and all of a sudden that becomes a big issue. So just air if you had any problems or small issues, you know, and that will stay a small thing and it won't become a big issue. I think the biggest thing for me was, you know, knowing your players and athletes, and how do you communicate with them. You know, leading into the games, we loads of conversations with players before we actually met up, and we kind of had a real good idea of what mindset they were, how they were, how much they were playing at their club and stuff. So having a good communication and being on a good level with them was a massive bonus for me. I think playing regular club football is so important for players playing international football. You know, you don't really have that much time to try and, you know, prepare them to be one at a major tournament, but also when they come in during a qualifying campaign, you know, you may only have 4 or 5 days of preparation, and, you know, you have to be realistic. You're not going to change them as an athlete in that 3 or 4 days. So, you know, playing regular football is massive. And again, you know, think critically about preparation. You know, what is the cost or benefit of implementing certain drills and training? And one of the things we had when we went to France with the management team was, you know, let's make sure we go out, get the work that the management team want to get, so we won't waste the meters and doing additional things, you know, for the sake of it, and keeping it as I said earlier, the goal. And just the last little bit is just, I'll show you how probably between 2 campaigns, how, you know, we've used the information to help and evolve the training process. So, you know, what happens with the data collect, how does it inform decisions, and how does it also, most importantly, affect, you know, the coaching process. So this was in the 2014 World Cup campaign, excuse me. And this is what a typical kind of week maybe looked like for the international team at that time. So, you know, they did a double, and then the day before a game, they would do 2 very, very light sessions, but they would do one kind of behind closed doors, and then you had to go and train at the stadium of the team sometimes. So some days it was a double before a game, some days it wasn't. And that's how, you know, a typical week kind of looked. One of the things in between is, you know, there's 3 days between games, which is not the case now. If you look at that as like kind of a total load, you know, the players are doing maybe 30K that week, which was probably 2.7% of 2.5 matches during that week. You know, and we kind of look at the campaign, and you look in the last 5 minutes against Luxembourg, you know, dropped 2 points. Portugal, you know, dropped 2 points. Last 15, you look at all the games, there was a lot of goals conceded very, very late, you know, and that was something that the manager felt that the team was always in the game in the last kind of, you know, 15 minutes. It was just, something was just lacking. We just weren't quite getting over the line. You know, we would have been 10 points better off if the games had finished on 75 minutes, just as an illustration of how it would have worked. And that was the table, how it finished during that campaign. So we had a bit of a review of, you know, how we maybe train, and the coaches spoke to players and different things, and everyone kind of had a little bit of an input in this. So what we decided was, could we maybe train a little bit smarter, but still get a level of work in. So when we look at that, you know, the total distance is down a small bit, but we also had 1 less day recovery between games, which was really, really crucial. That was just an example of kind of how much time we spent doing certain drills. So, you know, if the managers were really looking to do attacking play that week, or 11v11, we just made sure that they were prioritizing that time over maybe small set of games, which have their place, but maybe not as much during an international week. And then this is just a quick comparison between the two, and I understand there's probably, you know, there is differences, and it's probably not the most statistically valid thing, but when you're feeding this back to some coaching staff, it was a good tool for us. So there was a big reduction in the overall volume during that week, but not as big a reduction in the high intensity metrics. So we're still able to drop the volume, but keep players still playing at a match speed and being exposed to speeds and positional roles, I suppose, during that week as well. So there wasn't a complete drop off in the intensity metrics. And again, what were the implications on the players' wellness during that? You know, when we do campaigns, we had a bigger, players felt, I suppose, a little bit fresher going into games. So again, as a sports scientist, you're trying to quantify what you do. This was a helpful way for us to try and quantify what the players were doing, and feedback to the coach and staff on that. And then that's how the table finished. Now, I do want to note that I'm certainly not putting this all down to sports science at all. There was a lot of other factors went into this, but from a sports science point of view, that's some of the areas that we wanted to push to the management team during those conversations. Thanks for your time, and any questions or anything, fire away.
Cheers, Paul. Thanks for that. A really good window into sort of the run into a major championship and being at the championships themselves there. We have just a few questions from the audience. You mentioned it was your first major championships, Euro 2016, as a sports scientist, and you learned a lot of things. You know, you mentioned food, and specifically after the game and stuff like that. Obviously, you're in the playoffs now for Euro 2020. Is there any other sort of lessons or learnings that you as a sports scientist will take from the Euro 2016, actual championships that you'd apply to the Euros in 2021?
Yeah, I think probably the biggest thing has probably just been from when I first started to where it probably is now. Is I think it's almost like I think because of the longevity of the manager that's been there, it's almost now evolved to you're feeling almost like a club feeling when you go away on international duty. So there's always, you're constantly learning kind of on your feet. But I think the biggest thing for me is, especially during qualifying campaigns, is certainly kind of knowing my role a little bit more, and you're not going to make players, a specimen after having them for 4 or 5 days. So I think knowing that and not having the ego of trying to completely change them as an athlete, so the focus shifts from what it's like at a club level to what it's like at international level. That I think that's the biggest kind of thing I've probably learned through it is that really, prioritize the availability is probably the biggest thing for me really during international week.
Okay, and then as well, you mentioned that you're dealing in the squad with players from different club backgrounds of all different levels. Have you found any differences between players, maybe based on their own exposure to sports science and monitoring at their club, in their adherence and buy-in to the different kinds of monitoring you're doing?
I probably think sometimes not maybe the level of club that the player are at that moment, but there is older players who we've had in the squad who on paper might be playing at a lower level but have spent most of their career at a higher level. I think watching, especially when I first started, maybe I wasn't really working in a football team. I was just working with Northern Ireland before I went to Sunderland. I think one of the things that I enjoyed at the beginning was just watching some of the bigger name players. I think they were probably, and the older players, they probably approached their preparation with a lot more detail than, some of maybe the younger players in the squad. I think that probably is that maybe probably more related to experience more so than, the younger players are able to go out and just train where the older players need to spend more time at it. But I think watching the older players certainly gave me a good insight into how they prepare. And the other side of things that for me I really enjoy is actually you get a group of players who are maybe at 20 different teams, and I really enjoy just asking them about what do their sports scientists, what do their coaching team do. And I've been lucky enough to go and visit a few clubs as well, to see the players and see what they do. So I think that's one of the things that I really like about international duty is you get to understand loads of different players' experiences and their experience and perception of sports science as well.
Okay, yeah, definitely. And then the last question is from William, just back to one of the things he said at the very beginning. What are the main barriers that you've found to collecting wellness data at club level compared to your international level?
I think probably one thing is report time, and two was I never felt, we collected it for we've tried it on a number of different occasions on a number of different managers. We typically find the players were coming in at 9:45. We had different app-based systems to paper to different things, but I always found that it was still someone was going around chasing someone to put their wellness in. Now, typically at club level, the training session plan is probably decided the day before, if not probably, at probably 8:30 at a manager's morning or coach's meeting. So I felt sometimes by the time we got the wellness in, we weren't really being able to affect anything that day. I think maybe, looking back now, if I was going to do it again at club level or change it at club level, I'd probably just take it twice, maybe once at the beginning of the week when the players come in and towards the end of the week to see how they've maybe been affected by the week's work. Will probably how I'd address it now. But at international level, the players wake up, me or Ricky are probably the first face they see, with a wellness sheet for them. So, they're up for breakfast at 9 o'clock. We don't train till 11. So you have a little bit of time to, have conversations with different staff, and everyone is in the one place from the get-go in the morning.
Okay. Well, look, Paul, thanks for that. And thanks for sharing what you're doing. Best of luck with the playoffs. October, I think, is it?
Well, I believe so, but we'll wait and see for that.
Okay, perfect. Cheers.
Well, thanks very much.